The morning sun had just started to rise above the houses on Maple Street. A golden light fell on the quiet neighborhood, touching the rooftops, shining through kitchen windows, and landing softly on the gardens where dew still clung to the grass. The world was waking up, slowly but surely, and it was the kind of peaceful start that made people feel safe and settled. Down the street, the sound of footsteps echoed steadily, calm, measured, and familiar. It was Mr. Harris, the postman, doing what he had done almost every day for the past 12 years. He wore his blue uniform neatly pressed, his hat tilted just enough to block the morning glare, and a smile that had become part of his routine. People trusted that smile. They said he had one of those faces that made you feel everything would be all right. Every morning, he carried the same brown leather bag over his shoulder, filled with letters, bills, and the occasional postcard. He knew which houses had barking dogs, which doors creaked, and which families waited for something special in the mail. He took pride in remembering names, birthdays, and the small details that others might overlook. Maple Street wasn't a big place, but it had its own rhythm. The sound of a radio playing from the open window of Mrs. Parker's kitchen, the rumble of Mr. Lewis's old truck as he headed to work, and the laughter of children running late for the school bus. It was the kind of street where people waved when they passed by, where everyone sort of knew everyone. At the far end of the lane stood a small blue house with white shutters. It wasn't fancy, but it had a charm that made it stand out. The front yard had a tiny wooden fence painted just a shade lighter than the house, and a patch of flowers that looked lovingly cared for. Mr. Harris always enjoyed reaching that house. There was something about it. Maybe the warmth it carried, or maybe the little girl who lived there. Every day, like clockwork, she would peek through the front window as he approached. She couldn't have been more than 7 or 8. Her hair was always tied back in 2 small ponytails, and she'd press her palms against the glass, waiting for the postman to look up. The moment he did, she'd wave enthusiastically, her face lighting up with a grin so big it could make anyone's day better. He'd wave back, sometimes slipping a small smiley face sticker into the mail just to make her laugh. It had become their silent little routine, a moment of brightness in both their mornings. He didn't know much about her family except that she lived there with her mother. He had never seen the father. Sometimes he heard the mother humming through the window or saw her tending the flowers out front. She seemed kind, though quiet, always thanking him politely for bringing the mail. That morning felt no different at first. The air was crisp and the smell of toast drifted from somewhere nearby. Mr. Harris whistled softly as he walked, sorting the envelopes in his hand. When he reached the greenhouse at number 28, he stopped to pet the old dog that always waited by the gate. Then he moved along, turning the corner toward the blue house, the one that always made him smile. But something felt off. The curtains on the front window were closed. Usually they were drawn open wide by now. The little girl was always up early waiting for him. But today the house looked still, too still. There was no sound. No shadow moving behind the curtains, no small face pressed against the glass. He slowed down. Maybe she was sick. Maybe they had gone out. Still, he couldn't shake the small flicker of worry that crept into his mind. He tried to brush it off as he reached into his bag for their mail. There were 3 envelopes, nothing unusual. One looked like a bill, another a letter with neat handwriting, and the last was a colorful postcard from somewhere sunny. He smiled at the postcard. He thought the little girl would have liked that one. She always asked him where people sent letters from and what the stamps meant. She had the kind of curiosity that reminded him of his own daughter when she was small. He walked up to the small fence and opened the gate carefully so it wouldn't squeak too loudly. The morning breeze carried the soft scent of flowers. Someone had recently watered the garden. He stepped up to the front porch, reached toward the letter slot, and was just about to slip the envelopes through when something inside made a sound. A soft thud. Then silence. He froze, listening closely. Maybe it was nothing, just the house settling or a door moving slightly in the wind. But then he heard something else. A faint sob. It came from inside, muffled like a child trying not to cry out loud. His hand stopped midway. "Hello?" he called gently. "Is someone there?" No answer. Just quiet. He leaned a little closer to the door, unsure what to do. He wasn't one to intrude on people's privacy, but something about that sound didn't sit right with him. He waited a moment longer, hoping maybe the mother would come to the door. But instead there was another small noise, quick footsteps, light but hurried, coming closer. Before he could even step back, the front door suddenly opened. The little girl appeared, her face red and wet with tears. She looked frightened, truly frightened, in a way that made his chest tighten instantly. Her hair was messy, her pajamas wrinkled, and she was barefoot. "Hey there," he said softly, lowering his voice. "What's wrong? Are you okay?" She didn't answer right away. She looked up at him with big, watery eyes and tried to speak, but her lips trembled instead. Then she stepped forward quickly, almost stumbling as she came toward him. "Please help me," she whispered. Her voice was so quiet that he barely heard her. She was clutching her right arm close to her chest, holding it tightly. Something about the way she was standing made him uneasy. He bent down slightly to meet her eyes, speaking in the calm, kind tone he used with children. "Hey, it's all right. Take a breath. Tell me what's wrong. Where's your mom?" At that question, her face seemed to crumble even more. She shook her head, a few more tears spilling down her cheeks. She's sleeping," the girl stammered. But she won't wake up." Those words hit him like a punch. He looked toward the doorway. The air from inside the house felt heavy and strange. He could smell something faint like smoke or maybe gas, but it was too light to be sure. He looked back at the girl, trying to decide what to do next. That's when she moved her arm slightly, and he saw it for the first time. Her small hand trembled as she reached out toward him, and he noticed that her forearm was red, bright red, like she had touched something hot. He froze, eyes widening slightly, but she wasn't screaming. She wasn't even complaining about the pain. She just stood there, shaking, looking terrified, like she didn't know what was happening. Or maybe she did, and that made it worse. Mr. Harris didn't move for a few seconds. His mind was racing, trying to make sense of everything. This was not just a scraped knee or a simple fall. Something had gone wrong inside that house. He felt his heart start to pound, but he forced himself to stay calm. "Okay," he said slowly, keeping his voice steady. "You did the right thing coming out here, sweetheart. I'm right here, all right? I'm going to help you." The girl sniffled, nodding quickly as if clinging to the sound of his voice. "Can you tell me what happened?" he asked. She opened her mouth, but before she could speak, a low popping noise came from inside the house. Faint but unmistakable, like something metal bending under pressure. The smell of gas hit him stronger this time, mixed with something else, the faint edge of burning plastic. He turned his head toward the open doorway, his stomach tightening. Inside, through the dim light of the hallway, he could see a thin line of smoke starting to curl upward near the kitchen. "Stay right here," he said quickly, his voice firm but gentle. The little girl's eyes widened in fear. She shook her head, clutching his arm as if begging him not to go. "It's all right," he assured her, giving her hand a squeeze. "I promise it's going to be okay." He looked back toward the house, already reaching into his pocket for his phone. His calm, routine morning had just turned into something else entirely. Something dangerous, something urgent. He didn't know it yet. But that single moment, the frightened little girl, the smell of gas, and the sight of her trembling arm, was about to change everything. The sun was shining as if nothing was wrong. The birds were still singing somewhere in the distance. But on that quiet street, at the blue house with the white shutters, a small tragedy was unfolding, and the man who brought letters was about to become someone's only hope. The moment the smell of gas hit him more strongly, Mr. Harris's heart started to race. It was the kind of smell you couldn't mistake, sharp and heavy, the kind that made your throat tighten. He had smelled it once before, years ago, when a neighbor's stove had leaked. That time it had been a small thing, fixed quickly, but this felt worse. He glanced down at the little girl standing by his side. She was trembling, still clutching her arm close to her chest. Her small face looked pale, her eyes red from crying. He could tell she was terrified, not just from the pain, but from something deeper, the fear of what was happening inside her home. "It's okay," he said softly, trying to sound calm even though his mind was spinning. "We're going to get your mom, but first I need you to stay right here. Don't move, all right?" She looked up at him with a mix of trust and fear. But she's not waking up," she whispered. "I know," he said gently. "I'm going to help her." He gave her one last reassuring look, then turned toward the open door. The air that drifted out felt warm and wrong. He stepped in carefully, pulling his sleeve over his mouth as a weak layer of smoke met his face. The smell of burning plastic was stronger now, coming from the kitchen at the end of the narrow hallway. He moved slowly but firmly, keeping low as he went. He didn't want to panic, and panicking would only make things worse. The kitchen door was slightly open, and through the gap he could see a faint flicker of orange near the stove. His heart jumped. Inside, the room was filled with a hazy fog, the kind that stung your eyes and made it hard to breathe. On the floor near the counter, he saw a woman lying still, one arm stretched out as if she had been trying to reach something before she fell. "Ma'am," he called out, moving quickly toward her. "Can you hear me?" No response. He knelt beside her and could hear a faint, slow breath. Relief hit him like a wave. She was alive, but she wasn't waking up. He looked around quickly. The stove's front burner was still on, blue flame flickering beneath a small pot that had boiled dry. The pot itself was scorched black. That must have been what caused the smoke. He reached up, turned the knob off, and listened as the gas hiss stopped. He quickly checked the other burners to make sure none were leaking. The smell was still strong, though, maybe from the gas that had already spread through the room. He knew he couldn't stay long. His lungs were already starting to ache. "Hang on," he muttered to the woman, slipping one arm under her shoulders. "You're going to be okay." She was lighter than he expected, but awkward to lift. He managed to pull her halfway up, then shifted her arm around his shoulder. He had carried heavy bags of mail in the rain, he told himself. He could do this. Step by step, he guided her out of the kitchen, down the hall, and toward the door where the little girl was still standing, eyes wide. "Is she okay?" she cried, her voice shaking. "She's breathing," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "We need to get outside." He led the woman carefully out onto the front porch, lowering her onto the wooden steps. The fresh air felt like a blessing after the thick smoke inside. He coughed hard, his throat burning, but forced himself to stay focused. "Do you have a phone inside?" he asked the girl, still catching his breath. She shook her head quickly. "Mom's phone. It's in the kitchen." He pulled out his own phone and dialed the emergency number with shaky fingers. His hands were trembling, but his voice stayed calm as he gave the address and explained the situation. "There's been a gas leak," he said firmly. "One adult unconscious, one child injured. Please send someone right away." The operator told him to stay on the line. He gave short answers, his eyes never leaving the two figures in front of him. The woman still lying still, her breathing shallow, and the little girl who had now crouched beside her, gently touching her mother's hand. "Mom," she whispered softly. "Wake up, please." Her small voice cracked on the last word, and for a moment Mr. Harris felt his chest tighten. He had a daughter once, long grown now, but that sound, the helpless plea of a child, stirred something deep inside him. He crouched beside the girl. "Hey," he said quietly. "You did so good, you know that? You came out and got help. You saved your mom." She looked up at him, tears glistening in her eyes. "I was scared." "I know," he said. "But you were brave. You didn't hide, you came to find someone. That's what brave people do." She gave a small nod, though she didn't look convinced. Her gaze went back to her mother, who stirred slightly now, her eyelids fluttering. "Mom," the girl whispered again, leaning closer. The woman groaned faintly, her lips moving. What happened?" she mumbled. "You're safe," Mr. Harris said quickly, relief washing through him. "There was a gas leak in the kitchen. You must have breathed it in. Just stay still, help is on the way." The woman tried to sit up, but he gently stopped her. "Don't move too much. Just breathe slowly." She blinked. Her eyes unfocused for a moment, then seemed to notice her daughter. "Sweetheart, your arm." The little girl looked down, realizing again that her skin was red and blistered in places. She winced but didn't cry this time. "I was trying to wake you up," she said softly. The stove was making a loud noise and the pot fell. Her mother's eyes filled with tears, guilt and fear flashing across her face. "Oh no, I'm so sorry, baby." Hey, Mr. Harris said gently, trying to calm both of them. "You're both safe now. That's what matters." In the distance, faint sirens began to rise, a high-pitched wail that grew louder with every passing second. Relief spread through the air like a breath everyone had been holding in. Within minutes, a red fire truck pulled up, followed by an ambulance. Neighbors started to step out of their houses, watching quietly, concern written across their faces. The firefighters jumped into action immediately, some rushing toward the house while others came to check on the woman and child. Mr. Harris stepped back slightly to give them space, but stayed close enough to answer questions. He explained what had happened as clearly as he could, though his voice still carried the tremor of adrenaline. The paramedics worked quickly, giving the woman oxygen and wrapping the little girl's arm in a cool, damp cloth. One of them looked at him and said, "You did the right thing getting them out. The gas levels inside are high. It could have been a lot worse." He nodded slowly, his throat tight. He didn't feel like a hero. He just did what anyone should do, or at least what he hoped anyone would do if it were his own family. As the paramedics loaded the woman and her daughter into the ambulance, the little girl turned her head toward him. Her eyes met his for a moment, full of emotion, fear, relief, gratitude, all mixed into one. "Thank you," she said softly. He smiled, though it came with a lump in his throat. "You don't need to thank me, kiddo. Just get better, okay?" She nodded, still holding her mother's hand tightly as the ambulance doors closed. When the vehicles pulled away, the street slowly began to quiet again. The smell of gas had faded, replaced by the faint scent of wet earth where the firefighters had sprayed water near the kitchen window. The neighbors whispered among themselves, their eyes following him as he stood near the gate of the blue house. He looked down at the ground for a moment, trying to process everything. His hands were still shaking. The image of the little girl's red arm wouldn't leave his mind. He thought about how close it had been, just minutes, maybe seconds, between a normal morning and disaster. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. Then he turned to leave, his empty mailbag hanging at his side. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like finishing his route. He walked slowly down the street, his mind full of what had just happened. The world around him looked the same bright sunlight, the same sound of birds in the trees. But something inside him had shifted. He couldn't stop thinking about the little girl. The way she had run out barefoot, crying, holding her arm, but still thinking about her mother first. The kind of courage that small children sometimes show when they have no other choice. He reached the corner and stopped, glancing back at the house one last time. The front door was open, firefighters still moving in and out. The white shutters looked a little darker from the smoke, but the house stood solid. Still there, still home. He felt a quiet sense of relief then. Things could have gone so differently. As he turned away and started back toward his route, he realized something. Life could change in a heartbeat, even on the calmest morning. And sometimes it was the smallest acts, a little girl's cry for help or a postman who stopped to listen, that made all the difference in the world. The afternoon sun hung low over Maple Street when the ambulance finally disappeared around the corner. The sound of its siren faded, leaving behind a heavy silence. For a long moment, Mr. Harris just stood there on the sidewalk, his heart still pounding. The world around him seemed too calm, too normal for what had just happened. The street was quiet again, except for a few curious neighbors who whispered softly among themselves. Some offered him small nods, grateful looks, or murmured words like, "You did good, Harris," or "Thank heavens you were there." He smiled politely, but his mind was elsewhere. He had seen many things during his years delivering mail, people laughing, arguing, celebrating, even crying on doorsteps. But nothing like this. Nothing that left his hands trembling hours later. He walked slowly toward the small bench at the corner of the street and sat down. His legs felt heavy, and for the first time in years he didn't care that he still had a few houses left on his route. The weight of what had just happened pressed on him like a thick fog. He kept seeing the little girl's face in his mind, the tear-streaked cheeks, the way she clung to his arm, and the red mark on her skin. The image wouldn't leave him. He remembered how small her hand had felt when she grabbed his sleeve, desperate and trembling. It made his chest tighten again, the way only genuine fear and compassion could. After a few minutes, he pulled his phone from his pocket and looked at it. The emergency dispatcher had said the hospital staff would take care of the mother and child. But he wanted to be sure. He wanted to know that they were really okay. He hesitated for a moment, then called the hospital number printed on a small card inside his wallet. It took a few transfers, but eventually a nurse came on the line. She spoke kindly and thanked him for what he'd done. "They're both stable," she said. "The mother is awake now, and her daughter is being treated for mild burns. You got them out just in time." "Just in time," he repeated softly after hanging up. The words echoed in his mind as he stared at the empty street. Just in time. A few minutes later, and things could have ended very differently. He exhaled slowly, leaning back on the bench. The sky had started to change colors, soft shades of pink and orange spreading through the clouds. For the first time since morning, he allowed himself to breathe properly. Later that evening, after finishing the rest of his route with quiet efficiency, he returned home. His small apartment was tidy, the same as always. A few framed photos on the wall, an old armchair by the window, a pot of coffee still warm on the counter. He sat down at the table and stared at one of the photos, a picture of his daughter when she was around the same age as the little girl he'd helped. She was smiling in the picture, wearing a paper crown from a birthday party. That was years ago, before she moved to another city for work. He hadn't realized how much he missed that smile until today. He picked up the photo, holding it for a long moment. "You'd have done the same, kiddo," he whispered softly to himself. "You always had a good heart?" He sighed and placed the picture back on the table. That night, sleep didn't come easily. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw flashes. The smoke-filled kitchen, the woman on the floor, the child's trembling hands. He kept hearing her voice, soft but full of fear, saying, "Please help me." He turned over in bed, trying to push the memories away. He told himself that they were safe now. That was what mattered. But some part of him still couldn't rest. The next morning, the sun rose bright and early, painting the neighborhood in gold again. But Maple Street didn't feel quite the same. The blue house at the end of the lane stood quiet, its windows closed, its front yard empty. The smell of smoke was gone, replaced by the faint scent of flowers after the firefighters had sprayed water. Mr. Harris started his route as usual, but his steps were slower than before. When he reached the blue house, he stopped. The front door was locked, and a small note had been taped to the door. It read, "Thank you for saving us. We're at the hospital for a few days. L&M." He read it twice, then smiled faintly. He didn't know what the initials stood for, but it was enough to know they were okay. He slipped a small get-well card through the letter slot, one he'd bought that morning before work. Inside, he'd written a short message in neat handwriting. "Take care and rest well. Sending you both strength and good thoughts. Your postman." He didn't sign his name. He didn't feel it was needed. A few days passed before he saw them again. It was a bright Thursday afternoon when he turned onto Maple Street and saw a familiar figure standing at the gate of the blue house. The little girl was there, wearing a clean dress with her arm wrapped gently in a bandage. The sight made him pause. She looked smaller somehow, more fragile, but there was light in her eyes again. When she saw him, her face lit up instantly. "Postman," she called, waving her good arm. He smiled, walking toward her. "Hey there, kiddo. You're back home already?" She nodded eagerly. "The doctor said I'm brave," she said proudly. "Mom's still resting, but she's better now." "That's good to hear," he said warmly. "And you? How's your arm?" "It hurts a little," she admitted, looking down at it. "But they said it'll heal soon." He nodded. "You're tough. Tougher than most grown-ups I know." She giggled softly at that. "Mom said I was lucky you came that day." He looked at her for a moment, his expression softening. "I think we were both lucky," he said. "You ran out just in time." She tilted her head curiously. "You were scared too?" He chuckled gently. "A little. Maybe more than a little. But brave people get scared too. The difference is they keep going anyway." The girl smiled shyly, then reached into her pocket. She pulled out a small piece of paper, a drawing done in colored pencils. It showed a man in a blue hat standing next to a small girl holding a letter. Above them, she had written in uneven handwriting, "Thank you for saving my mom." He looked at the picture for a long moment, his eyes soft. "Did you make this?" he asked quietly. She nodded proudly. "It's you. I wanted to give it to you." He took it carefully as though it were made of glass. "I'll keep it," he said sincerely. "It's the best thing I've ever gotten on my route." Her smile widened, and for a moment, everything felt peaceful again, like the world had gone back to the way it was before. From that day on, things slowly returned to normal on Maple Street. The neighbors talked about what had happened for a while, how close it had been, how lucky they all were that the postman had arrived when he did. Then as time passed, the story became one of those quiet tales people remembered fondly. The blue house stayed the same, though now its front yard seemed even more colorful. The mother, once she was fully recovered, often tended the flowers again. Sometimes she waved from the porch, a warm, grateful smile on her face. And the little girl, she was always at the window when the mail truck came around. She'd wave just like before, and he'd wave back, slipping another sticker or postcard through the slot, just to make her laugh. One day she ran out again, this time not crying, but laughing, to show him a new drawing she had made for school. It showed a superhero with a mailbag, standing tall beside a house with smoke rising behind it. Above the picture she'd written in big letters, "Heroes don't always wear capes." Mr. Harris laughed softly when he saw it. "You're going to make me blush, kiddo," he said, shaking his head. She grinned proudly. "Mom said it's true." He smiled, folding the paper carefully and tucking it into his bag. "Well, tell your mom she's right about a lot of things." As he walked away that day, he felt lighter. The street looked brighter somehow, and the air carried a calmness he hadn't felt in a long time. He knew he'd never forget that morning. The fear, the smoke, the race against time. But he also knew he'd never forget what came after. The gratitude, the smiles, and the reminder that small moments could hold enormous meaning. Life had gone back to normal. Yes, but something in him had changed quietly. He felt more aware of people, of kindness, of how fragile and precious everyday life really was. Sometimes, as he delivered mail to other houses, he'd glance back at the blue one and feel a quiet sense of pride. Not because people called him a hero, but because he had been in the right place at the right time, and because a frightened little girl had trusted him enough to ask for help. That trust, he thought, was worth more than any medal or award. It was real, simple, and human. And every time the little girl waved from her window, smiling brightly, it reminded him of one thing he now carried with him on every route. Sometimes the smallest moments, a knock on a door, a cry for help, a kind word, could change a life forever. A week passed before life on Maple Street truly settled again. The smell of burnt gas had long faded from the blue house, replaced by the sweet scent of flowers from the garden. The weather had turned gentle, the kind that made the mornings bright and peaceful again. But even with things returning to normal, there was a quiet buzz around the neighborhood. People were still talking about what had happened that morning. Everywhere he went, Mr. Harris could hear it in bits and pieces. Someone would stop him at the bakery to ask how the little girl was doing. Another person would mention they had seen the fire trucks that day and couldn't believe it had happened right there on their street. He didn't talk much about it. Whenever someone asked, he'd smile shyly and say, "They're doing fine now, that's what matters." Then he'd go back to sorting letters or walking his route, pretending not to notice when people whispered kind things about him after he passed. The truth was, he didn't like being called a hero. He never saw himself that way. He was just a postman doing what anyone should do, helping someone who needed it. But deep down, he couldn't deny how much it had changed him. That morning had left a mark on him. Not a bad one, but one that reminded him how fragile life could be, how fast things could change in a blink. A few days later, as he reached the blue house again, he noticed something new. The little girl was outside in the yard, sitting on the grass with colored pencils scattered around her. A small white bandage still wrapped her arm, but she looked happy, humming to herself as she drew. When she saw him, her face lit up like always. "Hi, Postman," she called, waving with her uninjured hand. He waved back, smiling. "Hey, kiddo, looks like you're feeling better." She nodded eagerly. "I am. The doctor said it's healing fast." "That's good news," he said, walking closer to hand her the day's mail. "And your mom?" "She's inside," the girl said. "She's baking muffins. She said she wants to thank you." He chuckled softly. "She doesn't need to thank me again. I was just doing my job." The girl grinned. "She said you always say that." Before he could reply, the front door opened and the woman stepped outside, wiping her hands on a towel. Her face looked healthier now, color back in her cheeks. "Good morning," she said warmly. "I hoped we'd catch you today." "Morning," he replied kindly. "It's good to see you both up and about." "We owe you more than a thank you," she said, walking over to him. "You saved us. I don't even know what would have happened if you hadn't come when you did." He shook his head lightly. You don't owe me anything. I'm just glad you're both safe. That's all I could ever ask." She smiled, though her eyes looked a little misty. "At least let us thank you properly. Come inside for a minute. I made muffins fresh this morning." My daughter insisted. The little girl nodded eagerly. "Please," I helped stir the batter. He laughed quietly. "Well, I can't say no to that." Inside, the house felt warm and alive again. The smell of freshly baked muffins filled the air, mixed with the faint scent of soap and new paint. They'd clearly been cleaning and repairing since the accident. The kitchen looked neat and bright, the window open to let in the morning breeze. They sat at the small round table by the window. The woman poured tea while the girl proudly placed a plate of muffins in the middle. "I'm afraid they might be a little lopsided," the woman said with a smile. "They're perfect," he replied sincerely. "I'll eat as many as you'll let me." That made both of them laugh, and for the first time since that day, the air felt completely light. Over tea and muffins, they talked, about simple things at first. The girl showed him her drawings, explaining each one with the energy only a child could have. There were pictures of flowers, the mail truck, and even one of her mother holding her hand in a hospital room. Then she pulled out another drawing, one he hadn't seen before. It showed the same little blue house, with smoke curling from the window, and a man standing outside holding a small child's hand. Above them, written in uneven letters, it said, "The day the postman saved us." He looked at it quietly for a moment. The picture was simple, but there was so much heart in it. "It's wonderful," he said softly. "You're quite the artist." The girl beamed. "I'm going to show it to my teacher. She said we could draw something that makes us feel brave." Her mother reached over and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "She's been talking about you every day," she said. "You've become part of our stories now." He smiled, feeling his face grow warm. "That's very kind. I'm just glad I was there that morning." For a while, they sat quietly, sipping tea. Outside, a bird sang from a tree branch, and the world felt calm again. Then the woman said softly, "You know, people from the newspaper came by yesterday. They wanted to write about what happened. I told them I wasn't comfortable with that." He looked up. "You said no?" She nodded. "I don't want our story to be about fear or danger. It's not about that. It's about kindness, about someone who didn't walk away." He thought about that for a long second, then smiled gently. "That's a nice way to put it." She returned his smile. "Still, they said they might write a small piece. Nothing dramatic, just about you and what you did. I hope that's all right." He shrugged, a little shy. "As long as they don't make me sound like someone special. I'm just a postman who happened to be there." "That's exactly what makes it special," she said quietly. Later that week, a small article did appear in the local paper. It wasn't big, just a short column on the second page. The headline read, "Postman acts fast, saves mother and child from house gas leak." Underneath was a small picture of him, looking slightly embarrassed but smiling politely for the camera. The story was simple, just the facts, but people read it with warmth. The next day, almost everyone on his route mentioned it. Some left small thank you cards in their mailboxes. Others waved when he passed, saying things like, "You're a good man, Harris," or "We need more people like you." He appreciated it, but what touched him most came later that afternoon. As he turned onto Maple Street, he saw the little girl waiting by her fence again, waving like always. But this time, she held something in her hand. When he got closer, she handed him a small envelope with a drawing on the front, a heart made out of tiny postage stamps. "It's for you," she said proudly. He opened it carefully. Inside was a handwritten note in a mix of her handwriting and her mother's neat script. It said, "Sometimes heroes don't wear capes or fly. Sometimes they just carry letters and care enough to knock on the door. Thank you for being that person." For a moment, he couldn't speak. He just stood there looking at the note, his eyes soft and glistening. He cleared his throat gently. That's the nicest thing anyone's ever written to me." The little girl smiled shyly. "Mom helped with the spelling." He chuckled, tucking the note safely into his bag. Well, you both did a perfect job. From then on, something small but meaningful changed between them. They weren't just the postman and the family at the Blue House anymore. They were friends. The kind that shared little things like drawings, muffins, and smiles that carried gratitude in them. Sometimes when the little girl saw him coming, she'd run out to help carry the mail inside, even though it wasn't heavy. Other times her mother would send him home with a small loaf of bread or a jar of jam as a thank you. He never asked for anything, but he always accepted with a grateful smile. It wasn't about the gifts, it was about the connection, about knowing that in one quiet corner of the world, something good had come out of something frightening. Months passed and life went on. The Blue House stayed bright and full of laughter. Every time he passed it, he felt something steady in his chest. A reminder that kindness mattered, that small choices could ripple further than anyone realized. And sometimes on his quiet evenings at home, he'd look at the little envelope pinned to his wall, the one with the heart made of stamps, and smile to himself. He'd think of the girl's bright eyes, her bravery, and the way she ran toward him that day, trusting him without hesitation. He didn't think of the smoke or the fear anymore. What stayed with him wasn't the danger, it was the humanity. The moment two strangers found each other at just the right time, and something good came from it. And though the world kept moving and days passed like pages in a book, that one morning on Maple Street stayed with him forever, not as a memory of what almost went wrong, but as a quiet reminder of what went right. Years went by quietly on Maple Street. The seasons changed one after another, and life moved along like it always did. The small Blue House still stood proudly by the corner, with its white fence and garden filled with colorful flowers. The postman still walked his route every morning, his satchel swinging lightly by his side, his step steady as ever. He had become a familiar sight to everyone, a piece of the neighborhood itself. Children waved when they saw him, dogs barked in friendly greeting, and older folks often waited by their mailboxes just to chat for a minute. But there was one stop that always meant a little more to him, the Blue House. It had been years since that morning, when the little girl ran out crying and everything changed. She wasn't a little girl anymore. Time had a way of moving fast even when you didn't notice. She had grown taller, her hair longer and her laughter a bit softer. The bandage was long gone, replaced by a small, faint mark on her arm, one she sometimes traced with her fingers when she was deep in thought. Every time he stopped by with letters, she would come to the door, sometimes with her mother, sometimes alone. They would talk for a few minutes and about school, about her drawings, about how busy his route had been lately. It was always simple talk, but there was warmth in it, the kind that didn't need big words. He watched her grow up like that, piece by piece, year by year. One spring morning, she handed him an envelope addressed to a local art contest. She was nervous, fidgeting with her fingers. "Do you think they'll like my drawing?" she asked. He smiled kindly. "If you drew it with your heart, they will." And she did win in first place. When she told him, she had come running out again, not crying this time, but laughing. He remembered how her joy filled the whole street that day. Now, years later, she wasn't a child anymore. She was nearly grown, finishing school, getting ready to go study art in another town. One afternoon when he came by, she was sitting on the front steps sketching something in her notebook. "You still draw every day, huh?" he said as he handed her the mail. She looked up and smiled. "I do. You're actually in a few of my drawings, you know." He laughed softly. "Oh, really? Should I be flattered or worried?" "Flattered," she said, giggling. "You're part of my story, you know. My teacher said to draw something that changed my life, and I drew you." He looked down for a second, feeling that same gentle warmth he'd felt years ago. "I'm glad I could be a small part of it." "You were a big part," she said simply, and went back to her sketching. Her mother still greeted him kindly, too, always offering a cup of tea or a short chat. But now their talks were slower, softer, the kind shared by people who have seen both the good and hard parts of life together. As the years passed, Mr. Harris grew older. His hair turned more silver than brown, his steps slower, but his eyes still held the same kindness. The whole neighborhood still loved him. They trusted him, not just because he brought letters, but because he carried warmth wherever he went. One winter morning, snow had begun to fall. The ground was covered in white, and his breath came out in little clouds as he walked his route. When he reached the blue house, he saw that the front yard had been decorated with strings of tiny golden lights. It looked magical, like something out of a picture book. She came out, wrapped in a red scarf, holding a mug of hot cocoa. "Merry Christmas, Postman," she called, smiling wide. He grinned back. "Merry Christmas to you, too." She handed him a small box tied with a ribbon. "For you. Mom baked cookies." "You didn't have to," he said softly, taking it carefully. "We wanted to," she said. "You've been part of every Christmas since I can remember." He nodded, touched beyond words. "Thank you, really." That winter turned out to be his last one on the job. After nearly 30 years of walking the same streets, he decided it was time to retire. It wasn't easy for him. Delivering mail wasn't just work. It was his life's rhythm. But he knew it was time to rest. On his final day, the whole neighborhood surprised him. People stood outside their homes, waving and clapping as he walked by. Kids held up signs that said, "Thank you, Postman," and one even drew a cartoon version of him with his satchel. When he reached the blue house, he stopped like always. The woman and her daughter were waiting at the gate, both smiling warmly. "You're really leaving us?" the woman said, though her voice wavered slightly. He smiled gently. "I guess it's time. My knees told me they've had enough of these hills." They all laughed softly, though the air felt a little heavy. The young woman, not a girl anymore, handed him a neatly wrapped envelope. "Don't open it yet," she said. "Wait until you get home." He nodded. "I will." "Thank you." They hugged him before he left, something they'd never done before. It was a quiet, meaningful hug, the kind that said more than words ever could. That evening, after turning in his uniform and hanging up his satchel for the last time, he sat in his small living room. The house felt strangely quiet without the usual early morning routine to prepare for. He poured himself a cup of tea, sat down, and remembered the envelope. He opened it slowly. Inside was a folded sheet of thick paper, a painting. It showed a quiet street under a soft morning sky. A man in a postman's uniform stood by a blue house, his hand on the mailbox, smiling at a young girl holding a letter. Below it were written a few words in her handwriting. "For the man who brought more than mail, he brought hope, kindness, and safety when I needed it most. Thank you for always showing up." He sat there for a long time, the painting resting on his knees, his eyes misty. It was such a simple gift, but it carried the whole story between them. The next day, he framed the painting and hung it on his wall. Every morning after that, when he made his tea, he'd glance at it and smile softly. Years passed. The young woman went on to college, then became an artist. Her work began appearing in local galleries, paintings of small human moments. A woman pouring tea, a child watching rain, a man walking with a mail bag under a sunrise. Her art was full of quiet warmth, the kind that told stories without needing many words. One year, the town held a small exhibition at the community hall. The postman, now retired for several years, went to see it. He moved slowly through the displays, smiling at each piece. Then he came to one that stopped him completely. It was called "The Morning That Changed Everything." It showed a little girl standing by a door, her eyes filled with tears, reaching out her small hand, and a postman kneeling before her, his face gentle, his eyes full of concern. At the bottom of the painting, there was a small plaque that read, "Inspired by a true story, dedicated to the person who reminded me that kindness can save lives." He stood there for a long while, not saying a word. People passed by, whispering about how touching the painting was, how real it felt. But he just kept looking at it, remembering that day when the fear, the smoke, and then the quiet relief when everything was okay. He didn't approach her that day. She was surrounded by people, laughing, answering questions, full of life and confidence. But she saw him from across the room. Their eyes met and she smiled, a soft, knowing smile that said everything without a single word spoken. He nodded, smiling back, and that was enough. Life has a way of circling back, of reminding us that moments matter. The small, human moments where someone chooses to care, to stop to help. For him, it was never about being a hero. It was about being there, about doing the right thing even when no one was watching. And for her, it was about remembering not the pain or the fear, but the hand that reached out when she needed it most. Years later, People still talked about the story on Maple Street. The blue house remained there, bright and full of laughter, its windows often open with the smell of paint and fresh flowers drifting out. And inside, among all her art, one picture always hung by the door, a framed drawing from long ago. A child's picture of a man and a girl standing outside a house, with the words written in uneven letters, "The day the postman saved us." It had faded a little over time, but it never lost its meaning, because sometimes the simplest acts, a knock on the door, a helping hand, a moment of kindness, can leave a mark that lasts forever. And on quiet mornings, when the sun lit up Maple Street just right, it almost felt like you could still see him walking by, the postman with the gentle smile, carrying letters and a heart full of humanity.